if you look at women like us, nobody would ever think that we struggle with money.
I'm now in my 50s. I have a rough sense of how much I have in the bank, but I'm not planning to say, what if it goes away? What am I going to do in 5 years?
Now I look at money very differently. Over the period of building my career, paying off a lot of debt, moving countries, I've lost money as well and I've started from scratch. So money is now never, I know that I can do it again if it has to go down. So I have a very different view to life and that allows me to take a lot more risk.
It was not till my late 20s that I realized it doesn't matter how much you have if you feel a scarcity mindset that's gonna, like, in fact, the richest people I know tend to be the most
Careful.
Scarce or feel like they're lacking or feel like they're gonna lose it all. And so how to go about life abundantly, like no one really teaches you that.
Hi everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this edition of She Talks Business, coming specifically from Karachi today. My name is Misbah Naqvi. I am the moderator and host for today. We'll share a little bit more about my story as we go. But we have three amazing guests over here and I'm looking forward to engaging with all of them. Our topic today is going to be around our relationship with money, our personal stories, what have we observed, and really want to dig in a little bit more into what has shaped our experiences and how do we engage with the aspect of finance and the topic of money. So we're going to get started. I'll start with introducing each one of my guests, and please feel free to add a little bit more to your introduction. We have Sahar Habib, who is a humanistic therapist and a play therapist. And she's been in the space for how many years?
7.
For 7 years, which is great. Sarah Munir is the CEO of Invest to Innovate and has been running the company for a year now already, and has had a really interesting background in terms of all the things you've done, so hope to get into that. Halima Iqbal is the founder and CEO of Oraan, and you've been working with women and their relationship with finance for a while, so very interested in learning more about your background and also what you're doing today. So in fact, we'll start with you, Halima, and just get a little bit into it. Let's share a bit about yourself, maybe a little bit of background, in terms of how you grew up and what do you think has been a key memory that maybe shaped your relationship with money?
So born and raised largely in Karachi, relationship with money was always very interesting, to say the least. Had a very comfortable upbringing, but always saw money as a very uncomfortable point of conversations within the households. My dad was a chief wage earner. My mom was a homemaker. Very early on in our lives, my dad fell really, really sick. So I saw my mother stepping in and taking charge of the house and running the finances. Finances and money was always, it was never spoken about in a positive manner. There was always fights around it. And largely the fights would be not necessarily from running household finances, but mostly around my mother wanting to save more. Because while she was not a earner, she was the one who would have the most emergency funds. She always made sure that if there was any emergency that would happen in the household, she would have the finance. My father was initially a salaried person who went on to become a businessman. So we saw that transition happen. But then also when I was 11 years old, he fell really sick and then my mother had to take control of the finances from the household perspective. And that's where my key memory is, that I'm stepping in to help her run the rest of, even though I'm the third child and I was just 11 years old.
Maybe the most responsible.
I was the most responsible one. But I started helping in terms of grocery lani hai, bill pay karne hain.
And was that also financial support? Were you looking to contribute to the
Not
budget,
at 11,
or
it was just more like
running
helping her
errands
manage,
and
helping her manage the house, and taking up some responsibilities from her. And when I look back, I think that was largely defining moments for me as a human being, that how I see money and how I wanted to make sure that I was never in that position, right? Like I had things sorted out, whether it was financially, whether it was even in terms of responsibility. But I think, and then at 18, I moved away. I went to university in Canada. And at that point, this was, for me, it was very important that I was financially independent. Yes, my parents were paying for my education. But anything else I started taking on, because I saw how burdened my mother was with all the financial responsibility.
Right.
And we're four siblings, right? So that's a lot of financial pressure on parents.
Yeah.
Especially like when you think about education, now it's just becoming more and more expensive to raise kids. But that was always in the back of my mind, that I want to be able to contribute at least to my life. So picked up jobs very early on. Started off with being a receptionist at the hostel that I was staying at, then became a barista, then did research-based jobs. But throughout my university, I had something or the other going on. And that allowed me to build that financial discipline that I wanted. There was a point in my journey where I went to school, I went to university in 2008. That's when the world was falling apart. My parents felt the pressure in 2010. And that's also when my youngest brother was starting school. So 3 kids in university is a lot of financial pressure on parents, right? So I picked up student loans. There was an ability to take, and I think that also shaped the products that we make, right? So for my I took 1 semester off. I started working. I also was in a program, or that was a co-op program. So we worked 1 semester and we studied 1 semester. But that 1 semester I completely took multiple jobs.
And that was your decision.
That was my decision.
You opted to do it from a financial perspective.
Yeah, from a financial perspective, because the other option was, hey, we can't afford to pay this semester. Take it off, come back to Karachi. I was like, I'm not coming back to Karachi.
Yeah.
I will stay in Canada and I will
do what
it takes to make my ends meet and figure out education. I think that also taught me a lot of resilience when it comes to financial discipline, right?
Yeah.
I think when you go through these experiences, you're just, at that moment, it's just like, okay, it's fun, you're working, you're figuring it out. But in hindsight, like, that taught me so much more about personal finances. Like, there were times where I was just like, I didn't have money, but that didn't bother me, because I was like, I'm responsible for myself,
right?
And I have to figure it out myself, and that allowed me to be a lot more creative with how I was looking at the problem.
Also independent, right?
That
Very
sounds
independent,
empowering almost.
Yeah. So if I had to party, I would. It's my own money. If I have to travel, it's my own money. So I was able to make those decisions in a more mature manner.
Yeah. And so at this time, you must have been what, like 20?
I was 20. Yeah, 20,
Okay.
21. And then the following semesters, the loan. I kept on taking loans, paying it off to finance my education, and then eventually I also financed my younger brother's a part of his education.
Great.
I think that was also the decision. So initially, when I went to university, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be a lawyer because of how I saw my father falling sick and what the hospitals did, and there was no justice in terms of being able to like hold them accountable, right? So that was a very important part in my life, and I was like, I wanted to be a lawyer and do all of these things, but at that point, it was like, okay, A, I don't have money to go to law school.
Yeah.
B, I didn't want to study that much. And also I started seeing that I was naturally good with math and finance. But also the opportunity to make money was faster there.
Yeah.
So that was a decision.
Quicker,
That was a decision to get into the banking space. And that's over the years paid off my loans, started saving up, had my own apartment. So lived I think what my parents taught me and what my experiences taught me throughout this thing was you can't have money as a barrier to dream.
Right.
You gotta have big ambitions in life, right? Like,
we're going to come back to that because I think that's such an important thing to hold on to and have as like a driving sort of value. And I will move on to like Sarah.
Yeah.
So Sarah, tell us a little bit more. And maybe just, I think this is a good way to get started is like up to the point where you were maybe a working professional. Like what was your childhood like? What was your background in terms of your relationship with finances and money and values around it?
I don't know if I can use the word, but my relationship with money has been very complicated. And this is my personal relationship.
Sure.
Like Halima, I grew up in a comfortable household. So wasn't rolling around in money, but was always provided for. But I personally have had a very complicated relationship because I think I realized very early on that the path to freedom was tied to money or tied to financial freedom. So I've been working since I got out of college, which is also 21, have been providing for myself since then. And in my household, I feel like it wasn't a conversation of scarcity, but what really bothered me was that it was not something that was spoken about openly. Like it determined everything that we did, but we never really truly acknowledged it. I'm a very rebellious person, so for me, I was the first girl to go to college from my family. I was the first girl to move abroad, work abroad, and all of that was truly made possible because very early on, I took charge of my own finances, and I was like, okay, if I need to make my own decisions, until I have this piece figured out, nothing else is going to work.
How early was that realization for you? Do you have a sense of?
Yeah, I would say in my undergrad, I learned that I started.
So late teens.
Yeah, 20, 21. And the other thing over here I feel, which was very important, which made me very angry, was also gender. So I'm the first daughter, but the conversations with money were never with me. They were always with my brother.
And how much younger to you is
he? A year. He was a year younger. But I feel like there's a difference between financial independence and financial sustainability. So for me, I got financial independence very early on. I didn't become financially sustainable until my 30s. And that I feel is something that I would do differently if I had to rewrite my money story. Because when you talk about longevity, when you talk about going after your dreams, financial independence will only get you maybe through your 20s because you're in survival mode, you're figuring things out. But if you have like bigger goals like starting a business or buying like bigger assets, property, then that financial longevity piece becomes very important.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
Yeah, and a lot of that was, I credit my partner. He really made me strategize and look at money differently. But I don't think it should be on a partner for them to carry that burden for you. I think institutionally there's a lot more that we could have done in terms of
But it's also
schools.
interesting you say that because as we're growing up, our interaction with our family and within the family unit does impact how we think about money and our approach towards it. And similarly, if you are married or if you have a partner, that also is a relationship which is very close to you and it's a safe relationship, right? So there is an opportunity to learn and grow, and it could also be contentious in some cases. But I think it's interesting that you're much older at that point in life, and yet you're still being influenced by someone who's very close to you and whose money values could actually influence you as well.
And I did a coaching session, which I think was very transformational for me, because it made me realize that our early narratives about money are defined by what we hear and what we've grown up hearing, whereas our personal relationship could be very different. So like for me, talking about money seemed very dirty, it seemed very crass because I hadn't seen those practical conversations. And once I could shift that perspective, and we can maybe dive into that a little bit more, it became a lot easier, right? To ask for money, to talk about money, because I'm not just sitting on piles of money, it's a means to an end.
Right.
So if I can be open about what those ends are, which are almost always cool things like getting an education or buying something for myself. And it just becomes a much softer conversation.
Yeah. No, great. Thank you. That's great insights, and we'll come back to a couple of those points. Sahar, what about you?
So I have a few defining moments around money, and I was telling my partner this morning, who also has a huge influence on the way that I look at money today, that when I was in class 5, I had invited a few friends over for a birthday party. My birthday. It was the first time I'd had friends over, and the next day, I heard all the kids in school at assembly talking about me. And I was like, what's going on? And then I found out that one of the girls had said, like, oh, you should be friends with Sahar because she's really rich. And she gives really like awesome goodie bags. And she lives in this giant house that's basically a mansion. And my mind was blown because I was like, rich? Like, I didn't know I was rich. I didn't know what that concept was. And I thought, okay, everyone lives this way, but not entirely, because I had friends and family who lived in smaller apartments. I thought it was just a choice people made, and it wasn't something to do with how much money you had or how much wealth you had. So that was the first of many conversations about wealth and my family history around wealth. I come from like generational wealth, and conversations around it were not big, but we had very specific scripts around money, our core beliefs around money. As you said, like for you it was not talking about it, it was crass, but for us it was when I asked my parents, am I rich, they're like, everything you have God gave you. That was their response. And my dad always used to say that you have a lot now, but it can go at any point, and family is the most important thing. And this is in relation to conversations around nationalism and things like that, because we had been one of the few families that had a lot of wealth in Pakistan. And so there was a lot of conversation about losing it all overnight. So that was both empowering and disempowering, because on one hand, it was like, okay, like I don't need to be attached to this thing, and family is way more important. And whatever I have, I can be grateful for and feel blessed for. And on the other hand, there was this anxiety of like, okay, it can go at any time,
And how old were you dealing with those conflicting values or concepts, at least?
I mean, I think to some degree I'm still dealing with it.
When your parents first had that conversation with you, and obviously it was reinforced over time as well, but like I'm trying to get to how young were you when you were more, like you said, class 5 and the birthday, and was it around that time? And
no, I think when I went to college is when the anxiety started. And when I also realized what my financial position really was, because I was in college in the US, and there were people here who talked like me, dressed like me, but they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. They didn't know how they were going to pay their rent. And that was a really new concept for me, because the way class works here was so different from the US. And I was like, okay, like this is the nuance around poverty and class. And these are when I learned these things. But I spent most of my 20s being quite anxious financially, because I had never had to become financially independent. Like you guys had a moment of like, okay, like I have to get my act together. I have to be on my own 2 feet. And because I never had that moment, it was kind of like I'm dependent on the system, and the system provides, and I'm so grateful for it. But also, what am I outside of the system? So I'm still navigating that identity. And it's interesting that, when I was invited to this podcast, my name was written as Sahar Fatima. And I went by that by a long time, because I didn't want the Habib legacy attached to my name. But
you wanted your own identity outside of that.
But I've learned over the last 10 years as a therapist to integrate those different identities also, and to navigate like guilt around privilege, and values of generosity, of gratitude, of how to like channel all that.
And interesting that you did end up becoming a therapist. And did your relationship with money and those conversations at home and what you were dealing with, did that have anything to do with
Oh,
towards
100%.
those insights?
100%, because I've never been in a corporate job. I actually studied economics and and philosophy. I did a double major in economics and philosophy, thinking, okay, maybe I'll enter the world of banking. And of course, that didn't happen for many reasons. At the time, there was not a single female employee at the family bank. And I was not passionate about banking enough to like take on the patriarchy. And I don't think I really was interested in anything to do with finances. I mean, I have an economics degree and I still have never used it in my life.
Right.
And I found it very easy to study, but incredibly boring.
Right.
And I never wanted to cultivate a lot of wealth or success. And maybe that's because I've always lived comfortably enough that I didn't have to think about what it means to be truly successful. But that's not the story for the men in my family, because they have a lot of pressure to be successful in their own right, with their own name. So I think it's also because of my partner and my faith and a lot of different things that it's not something I sought after. But becoming a therapist, it's a profession that's not really reliable in your income. Like every week you have cancellations. You don't know what you're going to make week to week. In the month of December and January, you basically don't earn any money. So you have to be okay with living like that, and you have to be privileged enough actually to live like that. And I was able to do that because of my privilege, I think. But also, I did work hard. I studied hard. I didn't get into therapy or teaching, which I did before this, because of my family. I just found this, and
It's your own thing.
it's my own thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you. That's really insightful and very different, right, from what we've heard from
Yeah.
Sarah and Halima. And I'll share a bit about mine as well. So I'm
Yeah.
also privileged in terms of education, but my father was in the Navy. So, in the Pakistan Navy in the 80s, I mean, he never told us what his pay was. I never asked, but I'm sure it was much, much, much lower than anything anyone's earning today, even at an entry level. But my parents were always very conscious of not letting us feel like we didn't have money. And when you're in the military, you get paid housing, you have you have a home and a very comfortable roof, and in fact, it's actually even furnished. We joke about how basic the furniture is, but you get a furnished house, and that's to compensate for the fact that you're not earning a lot in rupee terms. So growing up, it was never a realization of like, oh, do we have money or do we not have money? Because we had a comfortable house, we were had a furnished house, a small car, but we never took vacations. And it was only in hindsight that I realized that it's like, oh, other people were taking vacations and we were never taking vacations. But we had pocket money, at that time, 100 rupees or 200 as, grow. Like when I was, I think, maybe a teenager, it became like 1,000. I was like, oh my God, this is like amazing. I can live like I want to live like a queen. But it was also helpful to understand then how to spend that money. And I would save up for things that I wanted. If I wanted expensive stationery, it would be something I buy from my own pocket money. But they never let us feel that we couldn't do things or we didn't have money. And it's only now as an adult in hindsight that I'm like, wow, we really didn't have a lot, but we didn't really, we weren't aware of it. And my mother was a teacher, and now I didn't know it when I was a kid, but as I've learned as an adult, it was because they had to make ends meet. And she also had a background in education. She'd done her B.Ed and always wanted to be a teacher, but it was also something that she felt she had to do to contribute to the household. And so both my parents were working, but because she was in schools, we got to study for like free or much discounted fees. And that also contributed towards the budget of the house. Again, all of this I realized later. But interestingly, we didn't talk about money either, to what you were saying.
Maybe that's a national agreement.
I think
it's a big culture.
I think it's a cultural thing as well, right? And to what, either you're like, okay, you have it, and so don't lead with it and be grateful for it, but don't talk about it because it's crass. Or if you don't have it, or if you're like middle income or lower income, it's like, it's something you're striving for, but you don't want to keep always focusing on it. But again, the other thing is like I was not from an entrepreneurial family, and I feel like entrepreneurial families perhaps have a little bit more of a discussion.
I come
around-
from an entrepreneurial family, and yet we
Yeah.
didn't.
There wasn't.
Because the cultural element of it is so strong,
Yeah.
right? It defeats common sense, because
Yeah.
when you grow up in an entrepreneurial household, it's also can be very unstable, right?
Yeah.
Everything that's happening around you impacts the family income directly, and I feel like
That's
as
true.
kids, you should know what to expect, and you're
Yeah.
just supposed to navigate without even having an open conversation around
I think
it.
maybe it's, and I'd love your thoughts on this. Maybe it's parents like protecting their kids to a certain extent because they feel like, oh, we don't, especially if you're an entrepreneurial, or like you were saying, you're a therapist. Like if you don't have other sources of income or investments or something to fall back on, like there's uncertainty. There's a lot of financial uncertainty, and maybe parents would want to shield their kids from that. I don't
I
know. if-
do think that's
I think
a
it's
reason.
I think it's also like if I look at my parents' generation, I think there's so much taboo around money that even today they will be not comfortable talking about it. I also think not everybody they're not also savvy.
yeah.
Like,
And do you think it's generational as well as cultural?
I think so. I think there was not enough knowledge available as well, right? Like, what is okay? Why is it okay for you to talk about money and navigate whether you have it or not have it, and allow for kids to have that kind of. Every parent wants the best for their kids, and
course.
money for some reason is seen as, oh, we should not have those kinds of conversations because it could have a potentially negative impact on the kid, without realizing that kids are absorbing everything that you are doing. And not talking about money is also putting some kind of complex in them,
Yeah.
whether you have it or not have it.
And maybe so go ahead. I was going to say to
Yeah.
you also, because your experience was different, where there was a conversation around money, but
Yeah.
that's also because it was there, and so it was like, okay, what are the values that you should sort of embrace?
I mean,
along
I
with
think
that.
I'm actually really lucky because I think there was a genuine sense of humility and integrity around money. Like, we had a lot, but there wasn't a need to show it, or we never traveled business class or carried designer things or had fancy cars. But I think in my case, there was like the value of humility and integrity was the most important one. But I think the question you ask is actually quite complicated because I've seen it go both ways with clients, where if there's too many conversations around finances, kids tend to absorb that anxiety and think that it's their burden really early on before it needs to be. And on the other hand, if you're not talking about it enough, you're absorbing it anyway and anxious about what's actually going on. So I think there's a balance about how much you talk
And also
around.
what those conversations look like. Just having empty conversations
Yeah.
around money are pointless. But if
Yeah.
you're talking towards certain goals or saving plans, or I feel like a action-oriented plan
Tactical,
is actually
more
quite
practical.
helpful. And I know that family has a very big influence, but I think institutionally in the generation, like I grew up in the 90s, who was talking about money? There was nothing on the media, and nobody in school ever talked to me about any of this. It's a life skill. I didn't learn it in college. Yes, family has a big responsibility, but then there are also other institutions that now are filling that gap.
Yeah.
Organizations like Oraan. I have younger girls in my family now who are working while they're in college and also investing. That was not an option available to
No.
us.
But I also think we're still lagging behind, right? Like, schools are still not teaching
Basic
and
finance
and
management.
finance
Yeah.
management,
Right.
right? Like, parents are also, whatever the kid wants, I think instinct hota hai कि फौरन उसको दिला दे, उसकी ख्वाहिश कभी हम unfulfilled ना रखें.
Yeah.
And when I see it with my kids too young, but my niece, I'm like, no, you have to have some discipline. So no spend Novembers or things like that. You start incorporating and just teaching them values of why are these kinds of things important in your day-to-day life so that you have some discipline around it. Having money, not having money is not the problem. I think the discipline around money is the most important one, and that's where humility, integrity also comes through.
Yeah, and the relationship with money.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was not till my late 20s that I realized it doesn't matter how much you have if you feel a scarcity mindset that's gonna, in fact, the richest people I know tend to be the most
Careful.
scarce, or feel like they're lacking, or feel like they're gonna lose it all. And so how to go about life abundantly, like, no one really teaches you that. I feel.
So you mentioned your baby, who's just a few months old now, and you mentioned you have a 2-year-old. What are some of the things that you're conscious about framing for them, or even for you or for me, Sarah, like people around us? Like, where are you changing that cycle? Like, consciously, how would you want to change that narrative for either your kids or maybe younger nieces and nephews around us, people that are in our sphere of influence? So maybe Sahar, if you want to go, and then Halima and Sahar.
I mean, I think that I want my daughter to have an abundance mindset for sure. But her upbringing is very different from mine. We live in an apartment. It's just me, my husband, and her versus this giant house with an extended family setting. And we live paycheck to paycheck right now. Sure, that includes some Greek yogurt and high-end groceries, but it's not like the type of upbringing I have is not the upbringing she has.
Right.
But I do want her to have those values that I had without maybe the financial independence that I feel like I never had, or the empowerment that I never had. I want her to feel that from a young age, where she feels like she can be responsible for her financial self. She can be resilient. She can be empowered around money and make decisions for herself. I don't know if I even got that reality check till I moved into my apartment. I was like, okay, I really have to pay for everything myself now. So hopefully she will absorb that, and I'm actually not sure how you teach that in an intentional, deliberate way. Maybe you guys who are in finance could share more insight on that.
So, I think with my kid's too young for me to have any thought around it. But I think with my niece, who's 5 years old, we're very intentional about. We're okay to talk about money. We're okay to teach her about what's expensive, why is it expensive, what does expensive mean, why spending out on Barbies every week is not okay. How do you build that discipline that every time you go out you're not buying anything? So those kinds of things we're now teaching her. And the concept of pocket money, like that's an income that you're generating, and how do you want to split it? How do you want to save money through whatever you want to be able to buy as a bigger purchase versus what should be your daily expenses if you want to go out, or what should go into charity or saving. So we're teaching that, and a large part of it is me teaching her, but she's absorbing, and I think she's now so curious about just general discipline around things. That is really fascinating. It's not about having money, not having money. It's about just making sure that she's understanding that it's not a privilege, right? She has to figure out a way to be independent in terms of making those kinds of decisions as well. We're not solving every problem that's coming in her life, because I want to be able to make sure that she has a better relationship with money than I had or my other siblings had. But I think when I see the schooling system here, one of the things that is still missing, and I think it's generally globally as well, we're not teaching basics around money. We're still not having those kinds of conversations.
For sure.
Around money. So we can do whatever we want to do in our homes, but when they're going to school where they're spending large part of their lives, there's still no conversations happening.
That's true.
Anything to add, Sarah, from your perspective around, like, what you came into and what you're going now going forward. And I'm also going to get to the next question, so maybe you can answer both. Is like, what is your relationship now with money in terms of like, how do you think about saving or planning, expenditure, and then we'll come to investments, but also the investment side of things. So, how has that changed, and what is your philosophy today?
I'll answer the first part first. I think institutionally, we need to hold institutions more accountable. So one of the things that really bothers me about our education system is they don't teach us about basic life skills, right? What are you putting in your body? How does it impact you? We know nothing. We'll struggle for 30 years without.
And I know you're big on nutrition as well.
And I feel like for me, financial wellness came in place when I prioritized my overall wellness, because it's all connected.
Yeah.
First, your body feels better, then you force your mind to feel better because it has to make sense. Once you're safe there, then you look in your environment, and money determines your environment. So it's all connected, and wellness it's not a buzzword, it's a very important life skill that has to be included in our education systems from a very young age. Then we can go into all those bigger discussions about capitalism and how our schooling systems are also so motivated by capitalist outcomes themselves, and also training a younger workforce. They're not training better humans or younger humans. So I feel like there's a big shift that has to happen there. I obviously don't deal with such younger babies, but like I have a younger sister, I have younger siblings. I feel like the best thing that I could do was be more open about my failures so that they could learn from it. Because I think nothing makes you more cautious or more prepared than seeing failure firsthand and then seeing somebody come out of it. So for instance, if you look at women like us, nobody would ever think that we struggle with money. And the fact that we can be open and vulnerable about it makes them okay with taking risks. Because I do think that when you talk about financial longevity and investments, your risk appetite and building that risk appetite is so important, which is also not something that women are given very easily. We have to fight for it. To me, it didn't come naturally, which is why I feel like my investment journey has been slower. Had somebody empowered me to be more fearless with my decisions. Go make mistakes. It's okay if you lose a few $1,000s. We've got you. I never had that.
And you were talking earlier about financial independence versus sustainability, right?
Yeah.
So now, how are you looking at building that sustainability?
I'm moving towards that. I wouldn't say I've nailed it, but obviously there's a journey, right? You're not investing, then there's medium risk investment, then there's high risk investment. So in my late 30s, I should have been in a much more advanced stage, but because the journey was delayed, I feel like I'm still in medium risk, in a medium risk space where I'm comfortable investing now in places where there's a return guaranteed. But I think what it has really helped me with is in my professional life, I'm so cautious and mindful about financial pathways, sustainability, making sure, I'm thinking about everything, planning for everything.
And is that, and obviously you're talking in the context of influencing career discussions,
Yes.
decisions as well.
And then we also work with female entrepreneurs a lot, right? So I can sense those things early on in female entrepreneurs. They'll have all the skill sets, but they just don't feel empowered enough to channel it. They'll always have CFOs who are male. They'll always defer those conversations to guys. And I'm like, no, if you're running the business, you need to know this inside
Yeah, and
out.
Halima, I know you have a lot of insights on that. We'll come back to that. So coming back to you personally, in terms of how you then thinking about, I'm going to save this much, I'm going to give myself a budget. Like, do you budget?
Yes.
And that's something I would love to hear from each one of you. Is like, what are the tools? Like, do you budgeting? Are you saying, okay, what is the percentage that you're saving that you're comfortable with? And then how you mentioned already a little bit about how you're thinking about investments, but
it's a step journey, right? So the first step is taking a pause, analyzing what my spending is looking like, what my savings
how
is
often
looking
do you
like.
do that? How often do you take a pause and say,
Initially
where am I
it
today?
started with like annual plans. Now I'm thinking 5-year, 10-year. Then obviously there's a sophistication to it when you're planning long term.
And how often do you revisit that? So are you looking
I
at...
revisit it every year, but now I do have a longer term vision to my financial pathway. I'm also diversifying where I'm investing a little bit initially because that knowledge base was so limited. Or that's what we are taught, right? Gold khareed lo, ye kar lo, wo kar lo. And there's much better ways of investing. So like I'm experimenting a little bit. I want to be bolder there, but I think it comes with, again, experimenting, failing, learning. And that's one of my goals for my 40s.
Great. Sahar, do you want to maybe share like how do you think about like budgeting, savings, investments?
I guess I can start with my current relationship with money, because I spent most of my 20s quite anxious about money and quite anxious about like how am I ever going to get my own house, how am I ever going to buy a car. It seemed things that were not like out of my reach. And then there was this very contradictory lifestyle that I was living. Like I mean, I still come from wealth, I still live in that lifestyle, so I'd be walking around in shadis and full diamond sets and not knowing how I'm going to pay my dentist the next day, you know. So that's what my 20s were like. But now I'm in this position where I have an apartment which is in my inheritance, and once I got it, the sense of security actually settled in, and I feel very content, and I don't really think about money that much, if I'm being honest. But that being said,
And that says a lot for like having a roof over your head that you can say, okay, I have a safe space, I have an asset.
I mean, I never thought something could, to me, I was like, I never thought an actual thing could give me so much security, but it did. And now I feel secure. I don't feel like any real bad thing could happen, or that I need anything, that I need to seek anything. So I don't have any financial goals. But I'm a type of person that I don't like living in terms of goals and outcomes. I don't know if that's disempowering or empowering, but that's what's worked for me. However, I do think that after having a kid, so during COVID, I was mostly working and we were relying on my income, me and my husband, but we were still living with my in-laws, so we didn't have that many huge expenses. We were in charge of our own everything. But overnight, after becoming a mother, I stopped working and all of a sudden had no income of my own. And I felt that to be really difficult and really disempowering, I guess is the word that I keep using because it's the one that fits. And that's when I realized, like, okay, like I can't continue like this, because it was actually causing problems in my marriage in terms of the gender dynamic, the power dynamic between us, because we'd always been equal in that way financially. And so all of a sudden I'm relying on my husband completely, who's now working 3 jobs, working 12 hours a day to pay for our bills. And I was very grateful that he was able to step up in that way, but I needed to provide for my family also, and at least for myself. And that's something that I've been thinking about now, and those are the career decisions I make. But if you're a therapist, you can't put that much, I don't believe you can treat it like a business. This is a controversial point of view. You can't put that much financial pressure on it, because then it seeps into your relationship with clients. When they cancel or when they don't show up, that frustration and resentment starts to show up. So I've been thinking about what are other things I can do in this space, such as postpartum workshops and teaching other therapists and things like that so I can be doing things that I'm interested in and
Have more income being generated.
Yeah, and more stable income.
Right.
More consistent income. And that's how I'm really big on saving. And that's been something I've always been on since a kid. I think that's a messaging also from the family system, that debt is bad and saving is good. And maybe to a fault, because I saved every birthday money, every anniversary money, where I probably should have spent it when I was a kid, because it doesn't...
People don't recognize the value of compound interest. So it's maybe a good thing that you've been saving for those thousands would actually be worth a lot more like 15 years later.
Maybe. But I'm excited to learn from you guys about investment and stuff like that, because that's not my language at all. I do, yeah.
Yeah, fair. No, I think it's also interesting because each one of us has like a struggle that we have. Sometimes it comes to the forefront, like for me, and I come back to you, Halima, but for me, it's like I started earning. I went to IB. I graduated, and like Citibank was my first job. And at that time, being in a foreign bank, was a pretty prestigious thing, but it also paid relatively better, probably top quartile of graduate jobs that you could get. And I was for the first time financially independent, and I was making my own money. I was still living with my parents, but like a good Pakistani girl should. But I had disposable income, and so for me it was. And I'm bad. I never saved, and I also don't think about savings. And it's interesting, given what I do now, is how bad my personal investing relationship is, and we can come to that as well. But when I started working was when I was like, wow, I actually have money that's going beyond my pocket money that I can actually do something with. But I've been really bad about savings. For me, it's like, okay, I have a rough sense of how much I have in the bank. And I know if I have that, it's okay. But I'm not planning to say, what if it goes away? What am I going to do in 5 years? Like if I can't work anymore and all of that. So it's interesting because for me, it's also something that's it's still evolving. And conversations with my husband about like, saving or investing or whatever are still, we keep talking about it and we don't get down to talk. It's something we both
because
like,
it also
get to
gets
it.
uncomfortable, right?
It gets uncomfortable, but for me, at least it's not contentious between him and me. We're pretty much on the same page. We approach things similarly. His family background is more entrepreneurial, so they have more in terms of like investments and businesses that have been built over time. And but him personally, and we approach money in a way that it's not a driver for either one of us. But why that's bad is because then we become very complacent about it. As long as I'm, it's not as if I'm living paycheck to paycheck, but I'm not strategically thinking about how much I'm making, how much I'm saving, and then what am I investing in. Do something here, wahan kuch kar liya, ye kuch kar liya. But if you were to ask me what my financial plan is, I was like, oh, I don't have one, and I haven't been thinking enough.
You still think you don't plan 5 years?
Yeah, I'm talking about now. I'm talking about today, which is so ironic given that I'm in the business of investing in people and then managing that. So I'm a great fund manager. Like I'm managing other people's money really well, but I'm really bad at managing my own money.
Right.
And I think going back to not being educated about it early on, being very kind of passive in terms of not actively thinking about it myself, and the fact that I started working and got a relatively decent income at a certain point in my life where I didn't have to worry about it because like my food and drink and rent were paid for. I was not contributing to the petrol in the car in the house. At some point, a few years in, I got my own car from the bank, so I didn't have to think about buying a car. I still don't own a home. My husband does, but I don't. We don't own a home together. So it's really interesting because it's just this, I'm so conscious of financial, like investments and financial management in a professional context. Yeah. But in a personal context, I just keep putting off that conversation of like, and I'm now in my 50s. So when am I going to get there? It's like, it is something that's like a realization. And like, I'm so fascinated by, and I'm really like, impressed by you guys as well because like you have like a 5 to 10 year plan, which is amazing. And I'm sitting here being like, yeah, I think I should get down to like planning for retirement because if you ask me, I'd love to retire in 5 years
but
and
if
not
you
have to
go
work
down
anymore.
the chain, you'll see that people much younger than us have far more sophisticated plans, and that's a positive trend.
Yeah, for sure.
That's really impresses me when I look at a young person who's not just focused on how much money am I making, but are also thinking about what they're doing.
Yeah, I have a friend who was over last night, and they were telling me about their 14-year-old who is very much into like social media and everything, but he wants to take this course on being a better influencer and making money from it. And he's after her to like pay like whatever $30 or something for this because he's like, he's going to help me make money. It's going to help me become, yes, he's also interested in the whole chashka of being an influencer, but it's also about like, oh, I'm going to have my own income. So we were just talking about like, maybe encourage him, first of course, check and see if it's legit in terms of a course, but also how interesting, like a 14-year-old is actually thinking about like, how do I get the skills to be able to then make money off of something that I'm really excited about. But Halima, we didn't come to you in terms of like budget, and how do you think today about like budgeting, savings, investments, and what is your philosophy?
I've always been a very frugal human being. So irrespective of having no money, having money, being financially independent, because I've been independent for now, like, I don't even know, since 18, I've been making my own income and supporting myself. So I've always had that scarcity mindset. So there is income, there's a lot more savings that I've over the years done, but I've now look at money very differently. Over the period of building my career, paying off a lot of debt, moving countries, I've lost money as well, and I've started from scratch. So money is now never, I know that I can do it again if it has to go down. So I have a very different view to life. And that allows me to take a lot more risks. So if it comes to my investment strategy, I'm a risk taker generally in life as well, but it's a very risky portfolio. It's either high risk or it's extremely low risk.
How have you thought about how much you put aside for investments?
Because I'm not a big spender, my first when I'm looking at my finances, the first thing is, okay, this is how much I need to have in the bank, no matter what. So that's one thing that I do. Then there's whatever disposable income that I have after paying the bills, because we also make sure between me and my partner that we're a very financially equal relationship, and we are contributing to the household equally. After all of those bills, if there is income left, then it's either I'll do a very risky investment and make some money out of there, or I'll just put it in like very safe investments. Recently, anything that I want to buy, and it's so my purchases are also now in investment. So if it's a bag that I want to buy, if I don't buy bags, but if
I was going to say, like, you don't seem like the buying type. I know you.
Whatever investment I have to do, I will make sure that I'm able to earn it through my other investments before I make a purchase. So I'm frugal and conjuice to the highest level.
You're subsidizing your purchases.
Yeah.
So you're also a risk taker.
Yeah. So agar stupid purchase bhi karni
It's interesting. So you give yourself enough of a safety net to be able to take the risk with whatever you've put aside outside of that.
But that anxiety around money, कि अगर कल Allah na kare sab kuch khatam bhi ho jata hai, that's not there, because I know that I have enough faith in myself that I can rebuild it.
Yeah.
And I think when you start navigating your relationship with money in that manner, money does not become always a problem.
Yeah.
Like, you have to start looking at it as a tool as opposed to this weird elephant in the room that you're never going to talk about, right?
It's so interesting because it's only now, much later, in like probably in my 40s and late 40s, that I have become comfortable saying, yeah, I want to make money.
Yeah.
Because it was always like, oh, I'm not driven by money, and I'm not driven by money, but I would also like to have money.
And I like what money does for me.
Yes, and same here. Like I don't buy expensive bags or jewelry, but I love traveling.
Yeah.
And I would much rather have an experience. And again, that's very personal. Somebody else might prefer to have a really nice bag, and that's like something that gives them joy. For me, joy is being able to travel and not having to think about where I'm spending, if I am, because I know I have a safety net. So as bad as I was saying I am in terms of, planning, I'm not good at planning, but I do have a safety net.
Yeah.
And so for me, this question is like, what are my priorities? And yes, money by itself doesn't bring you joy, but I think it's okay to say that you want to make money so that you can do a number of other things in life, or have the safety net that allows you maybe time. I mean, time is the most valuable, and if you have money, you're actually able to free up a lot more time. The other thing that for me is like was really interesting is thinking about investments at this late point in my life, where I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? Like, how can I learn from others where I can make investments which then allow me to do the things I want to do 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Whereas again, it's not something I've always been thinking about. It's not something I've grown up with. But also to your point, Halima, about like knowing how to get back on your feet and knowing how to make it. one thing that I've also felt, and I think this probably goes for all of us in the room and like a lot of other people and men and women, but also especially women that I know, is that when you've attained a certain level of education, when you've attained a weight, when you know how to make money or have a profession where you've been able to charge for your services or build something and make money, I think you become privileged in a way that you'll probably never go hungry. You may not have an amazing house, you may not be able to travel, you may not have just a lot of disposable income, but at least personally, I feel like a safety net of saying, I know I'm going to be able to put food on the table.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go hungry. Now, that's a very low bar to aspire towards, but it's not an aspiration, it's a safety net. It's like, okay, even if tomorrow, let's say I'm running a fund and the fund goes nowhere, I have invested in my profession or some skills and services. I have invested in education, which for me now was like 30 years ago, a very long time ago. My parents invested in it, I didn't, but I have that. It's an asset that I have. And I don't think that, I mean, I may end up taking a job where I get paid like a fraction of what I was in another job, but I still have the ability to do that.
I think it's also about experiences, right? Like, I think one of the things that we were taught was it's okay to fail, because what's the good thing that's going to come out of it is going to be experience. And whether you have the education you're talking about or the privilege of being able to work somewhere or not, if you go through failures in life and if you build discipline through those experiences, you are unstoppable. And I think that's where your ability to take risks also comes through. Because I've gone through so many ups and downs in life, and I'm just like, what's the worst that could happen?
And there's so much power in that, like knowing that you may have seen the worst of it, but also having the confidence and the self belief that you would be able to build something new or come out of it or fend for yourself.
I think it's a general rule of thumb, having a 6-month runway. If you are somebody
100%.
who has a higher education, has worked for a while, that's enough. You know, that should be your strategy. If you have 6 months of savings, then, and if you're thinking of making a change, you know, trying out something new or lose a job or whatever, going through any big change, I think that as a general rule of principle, that's more than enough. I would also say there should be at all times, you should have an emergency fund, because
100%.
health is one thing, like, you know, it's beyond everyone's control, and it knocks you out. A health expense can knock you out. Beyond that, look at what you're saving, what you're spending, your spending patterns, if there's rooms to optimize it a little bit, and then the rest should just be investment. So 6 months, I think, whether you're a guy or a girl, I feel like and all of us are capable of figuring out an alternate income stream or getting back on our feet.
Even when it comes to entrepreneurship and you know, given that we invest in startups and we end up talking to a lot of founders, you know, hundreds of them in a year, that in itself is a privilege, right? Because to be able to start your own company, maybe not pay yourself for the first year or two or whatever, you need to either have a saving, some kind of safety net, some savings, or you need to have somebody that can help cover it, or some early believers who are going to invest in your company so that you can pay yourself. And it is a privilege. And if you're coming from middle income or lower middle income, it's something that you have to plan even more so, because you may not have that safety net already there. So that's at least some advice that we give to founders also. It's like, if people come and ask me, like, you know, I'm working at, I don't know, P&G, or like I work at Coke, and I work at HBL and I want to do my own startup. I'm like, if you have a steady income, put aside the money that you can feel like if you don't earn a penny for the next year, you're okay. And then you take away that anxiety of saying, how am I going to pay the bills? And especially if you're supporting people other than yourself, family or others in you know, within your circle. So I think it is definitely important to think about it in terms of like, what is the runway that you have?
And then also, I don't know how you guys, if you have done that, but I think one thing that's very important is to have an active source of income, and then also to have passive sources of income, which are your investments. And you are able to take a lot more risk, even in terms of experimenting with what you want to do, changing directions, if you have that passive secondary source of
Yeah.
income, which is, when we were growing up, was something that you did very late on in life. You only invest in property when you have a lot of money. You only have assets, and that's not true at all. You have fractionalized investments. There's so many creative ways of doing it, and again, I think financial literacy over there is a big missing piece.
Yeah.
That we can address or should
sure.
address.
So Sahar, we've been talking a lot about like relationship with money, and I think you also mentioned, having had that background in terms of the family where there is a safety net, a security net. Like, are there tips that you would think you would give to people that are perhaps in a similar situation as you, where they are maybe coming from a safety net, generational wealth, and what you think your learnings have been through your own progression? Because where you are today and how you're thinking about it sounds very different from what you sort of came into.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I see people from my background struggling with is like either a lot of guilt about having a lot and people around them not having that much, or a lot of anxiety about it going away, and a lot of like fear of loss of wealth and income, or not making enough, or not hitting. It's like, I have to be this successful in order to be a realized human being.
And you think it's also because perhaps they may not be building their own thing within the family structure or the business, or is that?
I think it really doesn't matter. I think it's really about the attitude and a lack of reflection of whose beliefs have you ingrained within yourself, whose messages are you carrying with you, which burden is yours, which burden isn't, and how is this really helping you? Is this really empowering you to be a fully realized human being, or are you just operating from the scarcity mindset that we're talking about? And so I think if the guilt is not serving, thinking about like, okay, what do I want to generate? Do I want to be generous? Like, how do I want to cultivate this energy? I guess is how the advice I would give. But I see this in in my clients. It doesn't really matter how much they come with. Like, I feel like the family messaging is the most important thing. But then I see people taking these massive risks and being really like confident and bold in their choices, in their careers, and in their investments. And I don't know where that comes from, to be honest.
But as in being a professional in this
Yeah.
space, what do you think? What do you think it is? Is it because, I mean, obviously there will be different personalities, and the way
Yeah.
each of us approach problems is different, and the way we process information and how it impacts us is different. So do you see that is it very personality driven, even within the background being similar? Is there exposure
of course,
in other contexts?
personality has an impact, but I think it's just who's influencing you. Where are you getting your messages from? Is it from the capitalist society that we grew up in? Is it from your family? Like, I go back even 3-4 generations in terms of figuring out what the values and messages have been. I've had some really intense, clear messaging in my family around success and around what it means to be a human being in business. And also, they didn't apply to me because I'm a female, So, and I think all that comes into account. Gender, which school you go to, your family messaging, it all plays into how you view money, how you approach it, how you try to cultivate it. But I think I don't know, I think I'm still navigating with that philosophy of how tied you can be to money and wanting money, because I do think, as you said, there is a degree of, I know that I felt security when I got my apartment. Like, that's a very real, tangible sense
I feel
of
like in
security.
your case, it's more about identity, right?
Right.
Because you felt like your identity was defined so much by where you were born, what you were born into.
Right.
Whereas for us, it was more about freedom or independence.
Right.
And even in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like when you kind of fragment your own identity from the identity that was given to you at birth, assigned to you, or is repeated many times through your life,
Yeah.
it's where that confidence comes from, or that understanding comes from.
Yeah, of course. And I guess that's the advice I would give, because we live with our families, we often work in our family businesses. Who are you outside of that?
Right.
And how much of your identity do you want to integrate with your families,
Right.
and how much do you want to create of your own? And do you want to see where you start and where your family ends? Like, are you able to differentiate that?
And to your point about not using your family surname before for a while in the middle, where you would trying to establish your own kind of presence and
I mean,
an
I
identity
was
within that.
22, out of college. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was unemployed, looking for jobs, completely confused about life. And then people would hand me their resumes saying, like, can you get me a job in your dad's thing? And it's just like, it's such a confusing way to operate as a 22-year-old. So yeah, I think that I had to completely let go of that identity in order to discover how much of it was actually helping me and how much of it was not letting me form my own identity and make my own financial decisions. And I'm not there yet. Like, I'm still in my early 30s. I don't really have enough of an income to save or make investment decisions. So I have a long way to go. But I'm still figuring those things out. I do think where I feel in terms of my relationship to money is a really good place. And I feel like I'm not anxious and worried all the time. So
Yeah, which is at least a good, really comfortable place to be, right?
yeah.
And Sarah, you were saying you were talking about like being a planner. What are some?
I'm still anxious and worried. That's my default state.
Yeah,
at
I was
all
going to say, does
times.
that give you a peace of mind that, okay, I've now planned the next 5 years and it's done?
It gives me a sense of power and control, not peace of mind. I don't know if you ever really have peace of mind, because you can plan all you want. It's still outside of your control. But as like a hyperachiever, firstborn, I need to control things. And I felt like that was one domain where I was just in survival mode for a long time. So you don't really have any sense of control. And for the first time, I'm feeling that a little bit, and that's good. And I think my exposure to like environments outside of Pakistan has really helped me understand what options there are. Like, even when I went to college, I saw my friends on student loans, which was something that we never even thought of. Either you had the money to go abroad as a family or you didn't. No one ever encouraged you to explore those options, and that was the standard practice there. And they planned their life in a way. Yes, obviously they were predatory, and it's a big burden to carry, but at least it doesn't deprive you of big life experiences, which I feel like is the case for a lot of young people here. Similarly, when you're starting a business, you're either privileged enough to have the capital to be an entrepreneur, or you're not, and it doesn't always have to be like that. There are alternate sources of capital that you should be encouraged to explore, because not all borrowing is bad, not all loans are bad. So I feel like all those experiences have made me understand that it's a lot more complex than just having it or not having it.
Yeah.
But Sarah, I'm so curious. I'm so sorry.
please,
Can I
go
ask
ahead.
a question?
Yeah.
For all of you, maybe, but you were touching on it. You know, that feeling of not being anxious or worried or having a security. I'm just curious how much of that is reaching an external target, and how much of that is an internal shift that's realizing, okay, this is not in my control, no matter how much I plan.
I would say 80-20. So the internal state is still chaotic. But what makes me okay now is I know that I need this money for certain things, right? I'm not just hoarding or sitting on piles of money, or it's just not money for the sake of it, which has made me comfortable asking for money also. Because it's not dirty anymore. It's a softer conversation. I can rationalize it to myself. I can rationalize it to another person, another reasonable person. So I think understanding that's the means to an end, and it's not money for the sake of money, that's how the tone shifts, and that's how your attitude towards it also shifts to a great degree.
Halima, you were also talking and picking up on debt, which you were mentioning. You were talking about taking on student loans in college.
I actually want to know, like, what do you, sorry to cut you, but like, we must have so many Oraan women stories around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but so
yeah.
first on your own thing, and then we'll come to
Yeah.
like the Oraan women story. So for you personally, like,
Yeah.
what was that like taking on debt? Because we grow up with such a cultural taboo around, like, you know, don't get into debt, udhar nahi lena. Was that something like Sarah said, you know, you go there and you realize there's so many options, and
Yeah.
did you feel empowered because of it, or was there a sense of you know, worry and hesitation there?
I think more worry and hesitation from our parents' side. Okay, loan lady, and especially for education, when you could pause it and we could provide for you in the next semester, yada yada yada. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I have options available, right? I have different alternative sources to get me to the point that I want to without putting so much burden on yourself. And I know that over the years I'll be able to pay it off. So initially my dad has never taken any. Like it's typical Pakistan, right? Debt kharab hai, bank se nahi lenge. But when I took it on, I felt very empowered. And the reason I think I was also able to do that was because I was slightly financially independent at that point. I was making an income, and I know that I could have paid it off in a way.
Because we also hear horror stories, right, about people who like burdened with student debt, and especially in the US. I mean, I think were you in Canada?
I was in Canada. Yes.
So I don't know how similar it is, but in the US, you keep hearing stories about like student debt, you know, and the fact that people feel well into their 30s, they're still struggling with that. And then there's a certain sense of freedom when it's paid off, or and some just don't end up getting out of that cycle.
Yeah, I remember that sense of freedom when I paid off my loan and my brother's loan. It was extremely empowering. To be able to put down X amount of money for the education that is so valuable to you and the experiences that we've gone through. So it was extremely, extremely freeing. But also knowing that there are so many alternative ways to go about
and
life.
It makes you disciplined also,
disciplined.
right? When you know you have upcoming payments, right? There's no way you're going to go and splurge or take what you have for granted.
Well, people do, but that's the challenge, right? Some people are not that disciplined.
But that's where the systems be making you accountable matters. In Pakistan, there's whole taboo around कि loan नहीं देनी चाहिए, बुरा होता है ये वो. But you don't realize that actually helps you with your financial mobility. Like if there's not always, your income is not always going to be enough for you to maybe buy a fridge, maybe buy a TV, maybe pay for your kids' education. And that's what we see. Like when we see within Oraan as well, these women.
Why don't you share a little bit more about what Oraan does as a backdrop?
So Oraan is a financial institute which allows digital credit and savings. Our flagship product is committees. So 41% of the Pakistani population actually does committees because financial systems have constantly failed them. So उन्हें अपनी communities बना के अपने साथ ही एक दूसरे के साथ borrow और save करते हैं. When we saw that opportunity, we were like, okay, how do you digitize this, but also how do you provide agency, authority, and autonomy to these women who are part of these communities? Because one of our insights was that even if I am doing committees with my neighborhood or in my families, मेरी चाची को पता है, मेरे अब्बा को पता है, मेरे husband को पता है, जब मेरे पास पैसे आएंगे वो मेरे पैसे नहीं होंगे. And that's what we wanted to solve for, because the importance of having your own money is so empowering and actually moves families' financial trajectory, because a woman makes better financial decisions.
And there's so much data to support that.
There's so much data to support that, right? Like the better payers, they are the ones who will uplift families.
Pay for education.
Pay for always have emergency funds. My mother was a case of point. We've always seen her do committees in life. My shadi was funded by her committees as well. So whether like we saw that across socioeconomic classes that's happening. But what's important is to understand that when you provide those financial tools to these women, the confidence that comes with having that control over that financing is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
I like that the stories that we hear,
And that's the empowerment that we've been talking about from a personal level as well. And you get to see it across
we see it
the
across,
board.
and I think that also helps in constantly being comfortable talking about money. Now, like I've at that point where I'm okay to talk about hai nahi hai, that's okay, we'll talk about it. And we've opened those channels and spaces for these women to be comfortable in sharing their stories as well when it comes to finances, and them being able to take bolder decisions in their lives and being able to have some equity in their relationships as well, right? Because आप चीफ वेज अर्नर नहीं हो, आप इनकम नहीं लेकर आ रहे घर में, बट आप सेविंग्स के थ्रू कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहे हो, which is equally powerful than having an income into the household. And that's where women often forget that
they're contributing.
उनकी contributions क्या होती हैं, वो उनको किचन मनी मिलता है, जो उनको अपने जो भी बजट चलाने के लिए पैसे मिलते हैं, उससे वो सबसे पहले जो है वो बचत की सोचती है, सबसे पहले वो अपनी सेविंग्स की सोचती है. And that's so strong to provide that woman who's doing so much invisible work a space to be able to say you can do so much more if you have the right communities and the right tools available to you. So the first thing that she thinks about is savings, and then once she's comfortable enough, then she'll start thinking about what kind of different investments she can make. Right? Like we've seen women who are students to getting married, to have to saving for the children, and then now saving for their house renovations as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you shared a couple of stories which were so powerful. Last month or the month before, and you'd been at a conference and met some people, and those were real. Maybe you want to share a few couple of examples, but those were real personal journeys of women interacting with
I love
money.
the fertility.
Yeah. So maybe
there's
share
one
a couple.
very recently that has come up where this woman who saved her family from getting evicted from their rental household through committee money. Because उसका payout आ रहा था, उसको पैसे मिल रहे थे, तो उसने she was able to pay the rent and fight the landlord. There was some dispute that was going on, but she's paid a little bit more to keep the family there. And now she's thinking of how to move into another house, but to that shelter, to be able to provide for the shelter in the household through the savings that she was doing, and she was planning for that savings from an emergency aspect as well.
And I think just given our cultural context, gender roles, it's just so important for anyone to be financially independent, but even more women more so, because women are often put in the background because they're not contributing or not seen as contributing to the financial sort of equity within the family.
I have an insight on that. I think एक तो मेल ईगो आ जाता है जब फाइनेंसेस की बात आती है, तो मेल ईगो आ जाता है. And this is not to offend anyone, that's how we've seen with our work how dynamics within households work. Women are contributing financially through savings, through making sure that जो भी आपको budget मिल रहा है उसमें घर चला रही है, making sure that there's always food on the table. There's invisible work that she's doing which no one wants to give credit to. But जब husband का या partner का या father का जब सबसे बड़ा कोई भी financial economic crisis आता है, वो अपनी औरत के पास जाता है discuss करने के लिए कि how can she contribute to that crisis.
But that's also because they see her as a non-contributing member initially.
She is never going to talk about it openly in a drawing room setting and giving her credit. She's always that invisible supporter that is behind her. I've seen it with my parents, I've seen it with countless families, that constantly happening, and the woman always never getting credit.
Which is again, I mean, for us it's a cultural thing. In Pakistan, it's also a global issue right now. There's a lot of conversation around women doing a lot of invisible work. Of course, in the corporate setting, we've been talking about not getting paid the same as male counterparts. But even otherwise, outside of that, like how much unpaid labor goes into running a house and taking care of kids, and that's never really accounted for.
Which
and
would
paid
be an
for.
expense if she chooses
Exactly.
not to
So
do
that's
it,
the other thing, right? To see it in a way that to say, if I choose as someone who has a child and a family to go and work because that's what I want to do with my life, but also earn an income, who's going to take care of my kid? And so in Pakistan, because we often have family support systems, that is a slightly less of a challenge for a lot of people, but there's still people who have to fend for it themselves. And it's that unpaid invisible work that is actually supporting. So my point to what you were saying about going to the woman and asking to contribute, it's almost as if people think that, oh, you've been doing nothing this whole time, so why don't now you go get a job, because we are having a financial crunch, and so both of us need to earn. Which again is like, hopefully with time we can change the way that narrative works.
But I think what Halima was saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is even the men don't realize that the women are actually running the house.
That's what I'm trying to get at. Like
nothing would happen.
Their houses will not be in. Even as I am working 12 hours a day, I'm taking care of my child, I'm contributing to the household, I'm making sure my house is clean, nice, comfortable. All of this is happening. And my life has dramatically changed in the last 4 months after having a baby, right? But it's never a pause and saying, you know what, maybe there is a little bit more credit due here. It's just assumed that my list of responsibilities have increased. And I have to assume that because I'm a woman.
I mean, I don't think my husband's ever understood the mental gymnastics it takes to even show up for one client meeting. Even though I only work part-time, but I'm managing everything. So I think that's a really important conversation to be had.
I think it's just a bit of realization, and also women speaking up for themselves.
Push back, man, just push back.
But it also comes back to exposure and education, right? To what you were saying. To understand, I mean, there's a lot tied to the conversation around self-worth and identity, very much so, but also knowledge and access and exposure. And if we can start talking about contributing humans and who does what, and have younger people more aware of it, even if it comes to starts with financial, something that is seen as tame, but you're actually slipping it in there in terms of empowerment, because very often if you go with it it should be equality, you'll get pushback from a cultural perspective, from a religious perspective in some cases. But if you start talking about from a financial point of view, maybe you can kind of slip it in there, and girls will have a slightly different mindset because they would have had that exposure. I know you guys are doing a lot in terms of training women and to think about it. Sarah, even when you guys at Investor Innovate work with women-led businesses, is there something more that you have to do with women, or that you are doing in terms of their mindset around business? Because there is actual data that shows that women who get investment are actually end up giving better returns to investors, and yet they only less than 2% of all venture money that's spent in the world.
I think that gap in financial literacy also shows up even in women entrepreneurs. So,
and a hesitation around finance, which you mentioned.
There's a technical gap as well, because women don't end up taking those fields of studies either, right? You'll almost always see majority of women gravitating towards social sciences or softer skills, because this is not a career path that's encouraged in a lot of families. So then the gap that they have to cover is longer. And then there's obviously that attitude towards finance is almost always a sense of caution, where they want somebody else to look over their shoulder or look at things once they've done it. And that's one big barrier that we try to break as well, by telling them that if you're the business owner, then the finances are your responsibility. You can hire somebody under you to run it, but it has to be on your fingertips. And then that's how you also manage to create confidence in your investors. They don't want to be dealing with your CFO. They want to be investing in someone who understands the value of money, how to double it, how to get returns, where it's going, what your biggest heads are. So I think that's one thing. And the second part with women entrepreneurs is access to networks of money. So it works both ways, right? They don't usually have networks. They're not connected to networks of wealth the way men are, because they're also writing checks and they're receiving checks. Women, when they become ready to receive checks, they also still need to be connected to people who are writing checks. Ideally, if it's women, it's easier because I think there's a better synergy. They can look beyond the numbers too. But that network building and connecting them to the right pool, I think those are two big areas that we have to make an extra or conscious effort. Not extra, conscious effort.
And I think also from the investor side, I know you've done some work with angel investors and women as well. Like there are a lot of women who are, and I'd love your thoughts on this also, Sahar, who have maybe come from generational wealth, but who are not seen as decision makers within family investments or their family offices.
Yeah.
They don't see themselves as investors potentially. They see that as a role perhaps of a male member in the family, extended family unit. And so even, we've also had conversations when we were raising funds for our I2I ventures in terms of like women who have come from generational wealth or maybe are relatively well off and who don't think of themselves as investors. So going back to like investment options, yes, venture is a very risky asset class, but to have those conversations, say, have you thought about yourself as an investor? Because we want more women investors in this market. Like, is that something that, that resonates in terms of what you've seen?
I mean, yeah, definitely. I think we don't see ourselves as investors because we've never been invited to those conversations.
You're not at the table.
Yeah, we're not at the table. But I do think that's shifting. I don't know what's contributing to it. I mean, even in my family's annual discussion, the women were invited for the first time this year. And I think the men in my generation are fighting for that. So I do think there's a shift happening. I don't know what's causing it, but I do think there's a long way to go, obviously. But in terms of generational wealth, I think the gap between men and women is really high in terms of how they're, I guess, grooming the generation.
Yeah.
I was probably the first female in my generation who even I was the firstborn, but my aunt didn't go to college. I did. And it wasn't encouraged. Like, I did everything myself. And
and it must have been like, zarurat kya hai?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't have to fight for it, but it was like, why are you going? Like, why are you making this decision? What are you going to get out of it?
I think even in the most sophisticated settings where women are at best seen like managers of wealth, they're still not seen as multipliers of wealth.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the conversation needs to go. Where women who are multiplying wealth start getting better seats at the table, are more vocal about how they've multiplied their wealth, and then also create pathways for other women to come forward because they're very good at it.
Do you think that if you guys weren't in the position of necessity, then you would have ended up being in these conversations of like, okay, I'm going to contribute to multiplying wealth because I had to do it when I was in my 20s or in my teens, based on your personal stories?
It's a good question.
It's a good question. I think
Probably not.
in my setting, probably yes, because my mother, even though she was not direct contributor from a finance perspective, she was very, very clear how she wanted her daughters to be when it comes to finances and the personal finance and financial independence.
Not in my case. I don't think so. I also think almost all of your decisions are shaped by what you faced personally. So it's not like, it wasn't an inherited philosophy. I learned as I go.
Yeah.
And had that not happened, I would not be advocating so strongly for it either. Because I know how bad it feels. I want to make sure it doesn't feel like that for other people. And I think it comes from lived experience.
I think my mother would be in her position where she knew how bad it felt not being financially independent. So she wanted to make sure that her kids were financially independent. And she provided that pathway for us to be able to do that.
What is two or three really quick questions, and then we'll move towards wrapping up. But like, for each one of you, like, what is the best piece of financial advice that you've ever received? Whoever wants to go first.
Money is not the only currency you should care about. Time is.
That's great. And it's so interesting because we are talking about money today.
Yeah.
And yet, I really agree with that. That really resonates with me. And also because I feel like, coming back to the money question though, having a certain amount of money does free up your time
Oh, 100%.
to be able to then do whatever you
But
want
if you
with
change
it.
your perspective and not make everything about money, you have a lot more time that you could do better things with, which could contribute to you making money.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think um, we were always taught there are two currencies in this world. You can choose which one you want to prioritize. But money is, if you prioritize money, you will always have that anxiety and you will always be in that rut. So be mindful of how you want to spend your time, because if you spend time well and do good and have clean intentions, but money could be a byproduct of that.
I think in my case, what made a difference in terms of like self-awareness was starting to account for experiential wealth as well, in addition to financial wealth, because I think that's equally important. And while I
love that experiential
I
wealth.
do think it's important to save, right? It's important to have a safety net, but also not become so overly consumed by it that your present just goes by. So take that trip, buy that
Read that
bag,
book.
read that book, take some time off, even if it comes at a loss of money. And then when you start to actually document and write those things down, only then do you have a more holistic perspective of where your money is going, where your time is going, where you can actually make adjustments. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I feel like my investment journey is a bit delayed. But then if I look at all the experiences in terms of like self-investments, travel, everything that I've done, yeah, I might not own a house, but I've seen like 30 plus countries. So having that perspective and looking at it from both lenses, I think is very, very, very important.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Sahar?
I mean, I don't know if this is good financial advice, but I think someone once told me that how much you make or what you get in life is not related to how hard you work. And I think a lot of people who work really, really hard end up staying kind of stagnant in where they end up in life. So it's about making like different kinds of decisions and also not thinking you're in control of your own blessings all the time. And then something my Buddhist teacher said to me, which I really value, is that having enough wealth that you don't feel like consumed by it all the time, to have to cultivate it all the time. So having enough where it's not something that's actually imprisoning your mind. And I think that's true from lived experience. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
What about
great.
you?
Yeah, for me, I think it's something that I've thought a lot about, but I don't know if it's advice per se, but just something that I live by is, I think similar to what you're talking about, Sarah, is that I feel like it's okay to say that you want to earn money or you want to have money, but also stay grounded in the sense that it's not money for money's sake. It's not money to be able to buy a flashy car. It's money to empower myself so that I feel like I'm not making decisions with my back against the wall or from a scarcity mindset. So I think that for me is have enough, and maybe it's about thinking about runway, but have enough of an understanding of what you have so that you can come forth with like joy and abundance and excitement about things that you want to do, and not always thinking about, oh, but does this make sense? Does it make financial sense? To be able to just give yourself the freedom. So I think for me, it's like, I don't think I can put it down to some advice that anybody ever gave me, but it's at least something that has my philosophy in terms of like, yeah, I'm not going to be foolish and like go and suddenly spend like thousands of dollars on something that's like ridiculous. But at the same time, if I have some financial security, I should give myself a bit of room to enjoy things that I do enjoy, and spend money towards that. But I do have to get onto my investment journey, which I haven't done yet, and I'm like inspired after this conversation.
How soon do you think people should start thinking about investments once they start?
It's
working?
interesting. I was thinking as you were talking, you've been saying that for you this is very late and that you've come into it very late, and I actually see it as
Because I'm seeing people much younger than me do it so much
but there are also a
sooner.
lot of people at your age or older who are not there yet.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot that, I mean, I'm really impressed that you actually already thinking about like a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan and actually thinking that longer term. So it's great that there are people younger than you that are there. And yes, if I had understood compound interest earlier and started putting together like even 100 rupees from like the pocket money when I was 15 into a savings account, into an investment vehicle, imagine what I would have got out of it. So it's never too late to start there. So I think from that perspective, it's it would be great if we start doing this in college, where you're old enough to have some kind of, maybe not when you're 10, but when you're 19, you can find ways to earn a living, have a side job. Like you were talking about examples where you were doing things on the side very early in college. And that's then where you can start. So I think having awareness, at least by that time, you should have a good sense of, where. And then from an investment perspective, everyone's risk appetite is different, right? Like Halima's sharing her example of like how you're take risks, but that's from money that you've set aside and you know that, I can do whatever with it. And if it goes to 100, great. If it goes to 0, it's money put aside. Like even when it comes to venture, for example, we tell people that if you are doing venture for the first time, or even if you're an experienced venture, never put more than 10% of your investment funds into venture, because it's so high risk, then you could lose it all. So definitely have a diversified kind of basket. So I think when it comes to when is a good time, the younger the better. I think financial discipline, understanding financial concepts, the younger, like we've been talking about getting kids to understand it in school, great. But I think maybe by the time you're in college, you should actively be doing something about it, like actively be thinking about savings. And then, I mean, I would love to hear from you, because you guys both of you at least have more experience in thinking about how you make investments. So what would that
I think
look like?
Before investment, I think you should have your coverage of savings.
Definitely.
And I think the earlier you start thinking savings, the better it is.
Yeah.
I think investment also, anything low risk initially is very important. Don't go crazy with crypto. Don't think long term. Anything. Money is not made overnight.
And do you agree that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is in this context? I said, do you agree that if they say if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is? Like, with respect to crypto or some shashka that comes up.
Stop. If you don't have a savings fund, if you don't have your runway figured out for the next year, if you're looking into crypto, if you don't have alternative investments into mutual funds or EFT or whatever, don't go crypto. So I think just general, for me, what I see, especially with younger generation, they don't have a long-term mindset to money. Wealth is not built overnight. I think you have to have the discipline. You have to make the right choices.
Yeah.
You have to be patient. So anywhere you see two shortcuts, कि आज मैं यहाँ पर डालूंगा उसको डबल होके कल मुझे मिल जाएगा, that's probably a bad investment. So don't do that.
Good tips. Sahar, anything?
I think on the flip side, even financial institutions need to do better at making these products more accessible.
For sure.
Talking in a language that's accessible to a younger person, to a common person, and that's where we're also seeing a lot of cool stuff in the startup space, right? You have these young founders who understand how Gen Z spends money. They're talking to them in their language. They're creating products that make sense for them. So for me, that's very, very interesting and very exciting. And again, you have to be a few years into savings before you start investing. If you can hold a certain amount of saving consistently, I would then only advise to get into investments. It's a step process. Then you get into low risk, then medium risk, then high risk. But I think because you have all these Buddha Babas running these financial spaces, they're not meeting these customers where they are.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can have a whole other session on banking and challenges, but I think the challenge also is that they're not incentivized to do anything more than what they're already doing, right? There's very little incentive for financial institutions in our market to
cater
go
to
out
them.
and cater to these. And this is
Yeah.
why organizations like Oraan are so important and have such a bright future.
Yes.
Because, I mean, full disclosure, we're investors in Oraan and excited for their journey because there's just so much that can be done.
Yeah.
And the fact is that it's going to be smaller startups, it's going to be fintechs, it's going to be people coming from outside the system and disrupting
And
it.
we're seeing that already.
Yeah.
There's so much room for innovation, and what our data also is now showing that there are a lot of successful fintechs coming through from this space because it has been such a vacuum.
Yeah.
So there's good stuff happening on both sides. Yeah.
Yeah. Sahar, any major takeaway for you that you're going to be like, I'm going to go home and this is one thing that I'm going to do now after having had all the money talk? It's going to be a question for all of you, by the way, but starting with her.
I mean, I think my takeaway is that I don't need to be this intensely frugal about investing. I mean, I've not made enough of an income to really take like a big investment, but I do mutual funds and I have enough put aside that I could think about it. And also like valuing my own contribution based on what you said, Halima. Like even thinking about like how whatever I got from my mutual funds did pay for maintenance in the house, like AC broke, fridge broke. Like we didn't have money to pay for that. And that's not something I clocked until you said it. So I learned a lot from you guys and just the importance of being around other women who are talking about these things and in a financially empowered state. Like, why don't I surround myself by more women like this and have more of these type of conversations?
I think there's so much, thank you for that, and there's so much to be said for that, because for me at least, I'm going to say I really am super inspired, and I would love I'm going to go back and I would love to think strategically about, I mean, I have the savings, I've been doing that, but I haven't been investing. And so just it's a good reminder to your point about like talking about money, like actually really helps, because then you're like, okay, and I think we should have safe spaces for women to come and discuss that and share strategies, and like different perspectives are really important, and also have people that we can talk to who've done it before and maybe can advise us on how we build that journey. Any last thoughts, takeaways?
I think we need to continue these conversations.
Are there any conversations happening at a media, at a national level around
money, on women and money? No.
Yeah.
Nowhere in the world.
I think maybe there's more scope for that than all the
100%.
Personal
talk shows.
finance, or even moms like to talk
Yeah.
about.
I think that's one of the things that has struck me now after having a baby is like, how do you think money with a child? How do you even think about building for their investments, with their savings? Is that your, well, I don't know. That's a question is it something that we should be thinking about right now, other than providing for basics for him, right?
Yeah.
So these are conversations that are coming up, and our thoughts that are coming up. And I don't think we have enough material available out there to even think about how do you build financial stability for your kid in case something happens.
And also, like with your, with the clients that you're seeing, like, are there those themes that are coming in terms of like anxiety around money or dealing with like family situations around money, right? So I'm sure there's a lot that you can contribute in terms of what are you seeing as patterns as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit conflicting for me because I obviously get some clients who kind of operate with a capitalistic mindset and they have these really big financial goals. And so I want to help them reach those goals, but also help them see how it may be like their workaholism or their attitudes around money may be disrupting their lives and, their wellness in general. So it's still a balance for me because it's not my personal goal. Because sometimes when you teach people too much self-compassion, they're like, it messes, their financial goals are valid.
Yeah.
So how do you have a healthy balance of like, okay, you can actually work towards having a successful career, business, and also not be so like imprisoned by money and earning it.
Right.
Right. And what number is enough? I think that's a really important question. Like, is there a conceivable future where you are content? And often people don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. And I'm sure you need to unpack that with everybody, right? Because
Yeah.
everyone's answer would be different there.
Yeah, like if you have your perfect state of money, what does that look like? What do you wake up to? Like, what does your life actually look like? Do you have that answer, that vision? So
Yeah, really interesting. Well, thank you, ladies. This has been really great. I know we need to keep this conversation going, and we'll keep chatting, but really appreciate all of your time.
Thank you.
And for everybody who's listening and watching, thank you. Please share your comments and thoughts in the comments in the video. And thanks a lot for a
Thank
great
you
chat.
for having us.
Thank you.
thank you for having us and getting so vulnerable.
Yeah.